may ask yourself, who is this guy? What could he possibly tell me that has anything to do with my life? And well, honestly, that's my question too. Who am I? What is this place, this world floating in space? For most of my life, I took these questions for granted. I thought I had the answers. I'm me, the world is the world, and of course it's just floating out there. There's no mystery. But something changed for me. Something changes for some of us. There's a moment, maybe an event, maybe an illness, maybe just a quiet night, when the weight of existence finally lands on you. And suddenly you understand. You understand you need to understand.
National Security Council staffer told them that elements of physics were classified in the past.
We classified whole entire areas of physics in the nuclear era and made them state secrets, like of the like theoretical
physics,
science of physics. We classified them and made them state secrets, and that research vanished.
I thought I had the answers. You know, I'm me. The world is the world, and of course it's just floating out there. There's no real mystery there. It's the way it always has been. It's just the way it is. But then something happened. There was a moment when, during an illness that shook me to my core, even everything that I thought I knew stopped feeling solid. I wasn't sure whether I would recover in that fragile space. The big questions I had long ignored came rushing in. Why am I here? Does life have meaning? Is there more to this existence than I've been told? Well, I've since recovered and I'm fine now. But that experience, it changed me. It left me with a deep need to understand. A hunger that hasn't gone away yet. I realized that for thousands of years, people have wrestled with these same questions. And yet, the answers always seem just out of reach. So where did we go wrong? Where do I begin to figure this mess out?
Owned endangered animals, advanced stem cell science, and gained global recognition, until he said something that made science go quiet.
So I've come to conclusions that would shock many of my colleagues and predecessors. Space and time are tools of our mind. Experiment after experiment shows that not a single particle out there exists with real properties until it's observed.
I decided to start from the ground up and use first principles. You know, when I was younger, I was deep into the hippie movement, all about oneness and connection and harmony with nature and all that stuff. But as time passed, science convinced me it had the real answers. By accident, no more. Given enough time, anything that can happen will happen. There's really no mystery. It's just plain physics playing itself out. So I kind of became a physicalist. It felt natural. After all, my father was a scientist, and I'd grown up around science. And science had always been my foundation. But one day, life became real. The old answers stopped working, and the data just didn't fit.
Why these predictions were almost certain to also be ruled out, and why physicists need to step back and think about what's going wrong in their discipline. Because this isn't normal. It isn't normal for scientists to produce wrong predictions for decades and just continue doing this. Something is very, very...
There simply hadn't been enough time for an accident of this scale. For us, for consciousness, for the extraordinary universe. So I started digging deeper.
How about this? So, we talked about
I mean, I see you, and you are, really just a collection of particles that have no actual form, right? You just, at a higher level, you have matter, and I perceive you as a person. But at the end of the day, there's nothing there. You're just a bunch of waves, and we interact with each other through waves. Well,
I reduced the problem to the smallest pieces. What is all this stuff around me? What is matter? What's mass? What is this stuff? And that's when the ground beneath me shifted. I discovered that according to our best science, matter and mass seem to emerge from a wave of pure probability, a wave that somehow collapses into an atom. I say, what? Then I found the famous double slit experiment, which seems to suggest that consciousness itself collapses into a wave, into reality. And I say, what again? So I thought, fine, let's focus on consciousness instead. Only discovered we know almost nothing about it. And while I was at it, I learned our senses are limited, our memories are unreliable. In reality, we think our experience is filtered, it's fragmented, it's incomplete. I used to think I knew. I thought that science knew, almost everything, and that only small fractions remained unknown. I was wrong. We know so very little. So where does this leave us? For me, it meant starting over. I had to go back to the earliest ideas, to wisdom of the ancients, to the forgotten philosophies, to test each one against the science, stripping away the dogma and searching for a framework that I could hold it all together. And somewhere along doing this, on this path, I found something, a way of seeing the universe that ties science and spirituality and personal experience all into one coherent picture. And I call it recursive idealism. And to me, it feels like a key that answers the questions I've carried my whole life, and maybe, just maybe, one you're carrying too.
Seriously, which came first?
So who am I?
Dante addressed this a little bit. Which came first, consciousness or life? Most people probably would say number one, and this includes neuroscientists, Western philosophers, that life preceded consciousness. Consciousness emerged from life. However, there's another possibility that consciousness came first, and this is in panpsychism, Eastern philosophy, spiritual approaches, Whitehead, and Penrose objective reduction, which I'll talk about in a little bit. According to this, consciousness preceded life, and life emerged from consciousness.
And what is this place, this strange world floating in endless darkness?
Anything's going to be fundamental. It's good in the sciences. It's going to be geology and rocks. And it's not that they're going to disappear on you. I mean, there is something to this whole matter business. But if you take your basic rock and you talk about it with a quantum physicist, it disappears into vibration and energy. It's vibrating really fast and really little, and which is why it seems solid to us. But it's not really real. What do you mean by really? And then you look at this rock, and if you know any geology, all of a sudden your brain's just full of ideas and associations and analogies. And the rock, it's still there in some sense, but suddenly it's an entire universe of, if you know any geology. It's an entire universe of crystals and deep time and dinosaurs, and there's nothing in the physical world that doesn't infinitize itself when you start paying attention to it. So Corbin's tripartite cosmology, even at the level of matter, just won't do, because it's imagination all the way down and all the way up. Then, of course, you're still left with this nagging problem of the difference between fantasy and reality.
Our best science now suggests that matter and mass seem to emerge from a wave of pure probability, somehow collapsing into an atom. And then I found a double-slit experiment that suggested that consciousness itself collapsed the wave into reality. So if that's true, what does that mean for us? I dug into consciousness only to find, that we just don't know anything about it. We don't know where it comes from or what it is or how to even define it. When I learned our senses were, unreliable, and I really had to take a step back and get my footing again. It kind of shook me to my core. I used to believe that we had nearly everything figured out, and I was wrong.
Hell happened? I tried to warn you in the bar, David. I told you must exercise control of yourself, that it all depended on your mind. All of this. Everything is your creation. And now we're heading towards your true moment of choice.
True moment of choice?
Yes.
When did the lucid dream begin?
Do you remember the day of the nightclub?
We'll meet up soon.
That night, after Sophia left you and you fell asleep on
science, spirituality, and human experience into one coherent picture. And I call that recursive idealism. And for me, it changed everything.
How is it the tree is so smart as to manage to take the carbon dioxide, which is the carbon and oxygen nicely combined, and undo that so easy? Life has some mysterious force. No, the sun is shining, and it's the sunlight that comes down and knocks this oxygen away from the carbon. So it takes sunlight to get the plant to work. And so the sun all the time is doing the work of separating the oxygen away from the carbon. The oxygen is some kind of terrible byproduct, which it spits back into the air, and leaving the carbon and water and stuff to make the substance of the tree. Then when we take the substance of the tree and stick it in the fireplace, and there's all the oxygen made by these trees, and all the carbon would be much prefer to be close together again. And once you let the heat to get it started, it continues and makes an awful lot of activity while it's going back together again. And all this nice light and everything comes out, and everything is being undone. You're going back from carbon and oxygen back to carbon dioxide. And the light and heat that's coming out, that's the light and heat of the sun that went in.
One day in my deep search for answers, I stumbled across something unexpected. Fractals, patterns, endlessly repeating, infinitely complex, and yet strangely familiar. I began seeing them everywhere, in the branching of the rivers, in the delicate veins beneath my skin, in the roots of trees, the spread of their leaves, the networks of my own nervous system. They all looked very similar. It was as if nature had one handwriting, one blueprint, repeating itself across every scale. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. I revisited Leonard Susskind's idea on the holographic universe, that everything we experience might be a projection from a deeper dimension of reality. I explored the many worlds theory, first imagined by Hugh Everett, then later expanded by Max Tegmark, the possibility that infinite versions of reality unfold at once, layer upon layer, like overlapping waves. And the more I searched, the more I realized something extraordinary. Science didn't hold the whole picture. Because as I studied, I began to notice something else. The mystics, the philosophers, the ancient religious texts, they all seemed to whisper a piece of the same puzzle. The science had one fragment, the philosophers another, the spiritual traditions yet another. And for the first time I wondered, what if they're all not competing stories at all? What if they're all different perspectives of the same underlying truth? You know, like Einstein said, it's all in your perception. Where are you seeing the problem from? So, you know, I became kind of obsessed with fitting the pieces together. Fractals, quantum mechanics, holographic principles, consciousness shaping reality, ancient teachings, forgotten wisdoms. Each clue felt incomplete on its own, but it's like the old elephant story where the blind men are at different parts of the elephant feeling it and describing something different, but they're all on the same thing. It's all an elephant. They just can't put the pieces together without seeing the whole creature. So when I began connecting them, something remarkable emerged. A picture that made sense of everything. A picture is what I now call recursive idealism. This isn't a theory that throws away science. It embraces it. But it also recognizes something science all along has struggled to explain. Why consciousness exists and why patterns repeat at every scale. Why reality seems to be both mathematical and paradox of order and possibility. Recursive idealism brings these pieces together, not as answers handed down from someone else, but as a way that I see these pieces fitting. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, have you ever seen a full-colored Mandelbrot zoom? If not, you should look that up. Those endless swirling fractals, infinitely deep, yet always returning to the same familiar shape. Patterns unfolding, splitting and twisting, and then somehow they come back home to their original form. For the first time I saw one, something inside me clicked. It was like a spark, a connection. I was like, I recognized that. Because it wasn't just a pretty pattern, a pretty mathematical trick. It was a mirror, a clue. So I began to wonder, what if reality itself works that way?
Particles.
It's just it's a point where some variable is changing.
A zero-dimensional point.
Yeah.
There are no particles. There are patterns of excitation of underlying fields. Can one show me the field? No. So how do we know they are there? Because we know their effects.
That way.
We know how nature behaves.
What if existence isn't random at all, but built on recursive patterns, self-similar, repeating, evolving across every scale of reality? And then I saw it everywhere. I saw it in the galaxy spiraling in deep space, in the branching of the rivers and trees, and in neural networks of our brain, and in the tangled roots of the human history repeating across generations. Fractals weren't just a curiosity, they're a language, a signature, a hint. The universe is telling us the same story over and over again until we finally learn to listen. And then another realization hit me. If reality is recursive, if these patterns repeat from the smallest particle to the largest structures, then maybe consciousness isn't something that emerges from matter. Maybe it's the other way around. Every ancient spiritual tradition whispers some version of this, that consciousness is fundamental, that the physical world is a reflection, not the source. Science, too, seems to point this way, from the quantum wave function collapsing when observed, to the holographic principle suggesting reality is a projection, to the strange hints of multiple universes stacked inside each other like Russian dolls.
Scales, particles can be waves. So a particle can be in two or more places at the same time. It can be here, 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 like a wave, or just here and here, in what's called quantum superposition.
When we describe mathematically their behavior, the only thing we can describe is the probability of being at one place or another.
It's like a wave of all those different possibilities. It's not that the electron is in one place or the other, we just don't know. It's that the electron really is a combination of every possible place it could be until we look at it.
Quantum mechanics only tells us the probability of a particle's properties, like location.
The pieces were scattered everywhere, in physics, in philosophy, in religion, in math. And when I brought them all together, a picture began to form. The idea that reality is a recursive process, unfolding in patterns that mirror themselves endlessly, and that consciousness is not only a byproduct of matter, it's the canvas upon which matter is painted. It explains why fractals appear across nature, why the universe looks the same at every scale, why ancient wisdom and modern science, despite their differences, seem to rhyme. Recursive idealism doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it offers a way to connect the dots, to see the hidden structures beneath the surface, and to realize that the mystery we've been searching for has been staring at us the entire time.
Single one of us is a field that is both the observer, the observed, and the actor.
Computing is the first technology that takes the idea serious that we live in a multiverse. It can be seen as farming out computations to parallel universes. Let me explain. In quantum physics, the key mathematical object to describe many worlds is called superposition. To understand what it is, let's look at this simple system. You just need 3 bits to describe it. Each coin is a 2-state system, heads or tails, 0 or 1. We look at a start state. If I were to know which forces act on the system, then I can predict its trajectory and future states. This is how we reason in classical physics and also in everyday life. But if we were to treat this as a quantum system, then it can branch into many configurations simultaneously, and we have to keep track of all those trajectories, interfere them, to make an accurate prediction of what states we are going to see in the future. So the equations of quantum mechanics tell us that at any time, any object, myself or the world at large, exists in a superposition of many configurations.
So different cultures, different ages, but they all seem to point towards the same underlying truth. Consciousness came first, with the idea that before particles, before atoms, before time and space, there was an awareness, a field of infinite potential, a boundless ocean of possibility. Call it God, call it source, call it the quantum vacuum if you prefer. But from this origin, waves of probability emerged, rippling, interacting, and cascading into self-repeating patterns, like the Mandelbrot set. These recursive patterns unfold into everything we know, energy, matter, life, and us. And here's where it becomes strange, if it hadn't already. The quantum world shows us that observation changes reality. The wave becomes a particle. The possible becomes the actual. This means that consciousness isn't just watching the universe, it's participating in the creation. Recursive idealism sees reality as a conversation between awareness and form, a feedback loop, an infinite dance, where consciousness explores itself through patterns, through matter, and through us. The religious texts gave us the poetry, the philosophers gave us the meaning, and the science gave us the mechanics. When we place these pieces all together, the picture becomes clear. We're not separate from the source. We are patterns within a recursive, single, vast, living awareness. So if this is true, the story of the universe isn't a cold accident. It's an unfolding masterpiece, and you're part of it. If the universe itself whispered a secret, there's only one pattern, endlessly rediscovering itself. From there, the journey deepened. The science behind the spiral. As strange as this theory may sound, much of it has been inspired by science itself. Physics, cosmology, neuroscience, and even information theory that keeps recirculating. It circles back to one unsettling conclusion. The universe behaves more like consciousness than like dead matter. The Big Bang, the moment there was nothing. The next, there was everything. Out of what did this everything emerge? Traditional materialism suggests random chance, but quantum physics tells us a different story. At the smallest scale, reality isn't made of solid particles. It's built on probabilities, on wave functions and information. As the physicist John Wheeler famously put it, it from bit. Matter itself seems to arise from information, an echo of the idea that awareness is the substrate of reality. Then there's the holographic principle. developed from the framework of Leonard Susskind and others. Later, Stephen Hawking's The Black Hole Paradox. It suggests that the entire three-dimensional universe may be encoded on a two-dimensional boundary, like a cosmic projection. To me, this is electrifying, because if reality is holographic, then our sense of solidity is just a filtered interface, not the thing itself. So fractals drove me to the next realization. Watching a Mandelbrot zoom, I saw self-similarities, patterns repeating endlessly, spiraling into infinity, spiraling into infinity. And I thought, this is us. From the branching of neurons to the rivers of our blood, to the splintering of galaxies, to the structures of trees, the universe speaks one language. It's recursive. It's geometry. This isn't randomness. It's a pattern of awareness exploring itself through infinite scales. And quantum physics deepens the mystery further. Take the double-slit experiment, where whether a photon behaves like a wave or a particle depends on whether it's observed. At the smallest level, the universe responds to awareness. If consciousness were just an accident of biology, why would matter itself behave as if it knows when it's being watched? So I began to connect these threads, and fractals show recursive patterns across all scales, and quantum mechanics suggests observation of awareness shape physics and physical outcomes. The holographic principle hints that physical reality is a projection, not a base layer. And neuroscience increasingly question whether the brain generates consciousness or simply filters it, a theory Don Hoffman and Federico Fagan and others explore. The picture emerges from science seemed to echo the same ancient, that consciousness is primary and the universe is an expression. The fractured mirror, consciousness splitting itself. If we're to take the strange findings of modern physics seriously, we're faced with a radical possibility. Reality is not what it seems. Matter isn't solid. Time isn't absolute. Space may not be fundamental. What if all these galaxies and oceans are your thoughts? Your thoughts and my thoughts are expressions of something deeper. I began to see these discoveries as clues, scattered across disciplines, pointing towards a single pattern. In recursive idealism, consciousness, the infinite field of awareness, folds into itself, creating layers of experiences. It's like a mirror shattered into billions of fragments, each reflecting slightly different view of the same light. Each of us is one of those fragments, living within the illusion of separation. Science gives us hints, hidden structures. The double-slit experiment. Particles behave differently when observed. Somehow, reality waits until attention is placed on it before it chooses a path. This suggests that consciousness isn't a latecomer to the universe. It's woven into its fabric. The holographic principle implies that everything we see, mountains, stars, the person in the mirror is a projection of a deeper information encoded elsewhere. If the physical is an image, what's the projector? In this framework, consciousness is the light source, and our brains are filters that shape how the light appears. Fractals reveal the nature preferred self-similarities. These branches of trees echo structures of rivers, which echoes the firing of neurons, which echoes the cosmic web of galaxies. This repetition is not accidental. It's a signature of the recursive process, awareness creating patterns within patterns to explore the infinite scales. In neuroscience, researchers like Don Hoffman and Federico Fagan propose the brain doesn't create consciousness, but reduces it, acting as filtering mechanisms. Reality, they suggest, is like a vast ocean, and our waking awareness is a single bucketful drawn from it. This aligns perfectly with the idea that consciousness forgets itself in order to experience individuality. The universe began not as a meaningless explosion of particles, but as a creative act of self-exploration. Pure awareness that, call it Brahman, the field of one, disassociated, fracturing into countless localized parts of perspectives. Through this separation, it creates contrast. Self and other, light and shadow, matter and void, yin and yang. We explore these inside this self-generating labyrinth. Every thought, every action, and choice sends ripples outward through the fractal, influencing the collective whole. And yet, despite all appearances, nothing is ever truly separate. Each fragment of consciousness is still tethered to the infinite source. The mirror may be shattered, but the light behind it remains whole. This doesn't reduce science to mysticism. It elevates science into context. Quantum physics, cosmology, neuroscience are uncovered different faces of the same truth, that the universe behaves as a thought of consciousness, and consciousness is primary, and matter is its expression.
There is a deeper reality where the feelings and the fields exist, the meaning of information exists, and from that world you have this world that is a classical world where you can get classical information, and we think that the only world that exists is this world. But this world we have constructed with our bodies. Field does not exist in space and time. Space-time exists within this field. Every single one of us is a field that is both the observer, the observed, and the actor.
That was a real key moment for Einstein. In fact, there's a quote, "Something snapped inside of me." That was the moment when he knew that he had looked into reality in a way that nobody previously had. But a real test, not to retrodict, is to predict something that no one has seen before.